even though President Macron and his party seem to enjoy most of the votes so far, with more than 95% being counted, but only 50% showed up at the polls, much lower than the presidential election. What does it say, briefly?
What they say is that they have lost confidence in the political system, and that it doesn't really matter who will be elected, as they, indicate very strongly that they don't trust their MPs anymore. And I think it's a sad thing, but it means that the message being so strong, I hope that the newly elected MPs now will make sure that the promises that they're making are translated into action, and that the changes that people wanted will actually happen.
And before we go to the other two gentlemen, may I just follow up, Ms. Conway-Mouret? I mean, since last year, already this is the 8th round of election in your country. That's a lot for any voter. Even they love politics. They have to bear a lot of burden in order to get there on time and cast their votes.
Well, yes, but then in Switzerland they have a referendum nearly every month, because their opinion is being asked. And yes, well, that's their system. So our system indeed is a bit busy now, because we have adopted the primary system in the major political parties, where the candidates are actually chosen. But it was only in the two main parties, because indeed Monsieur Macron was not chosen by a party that didn't exist a year ago. He created it. He was the leader of it, and he went with it, So maybe there are lessons to be drawn for whether we should continue with this system of primary that designates a candidate that then obviously loses for the party that he represents.
That is in France. A new party, just 1 year old, coming out of nowhere, eventually got the election, certainly likely to have the majority in the parliament, at least for the first round. Let's go to you, Professor Whiteley. Of course, the Conservative Party is much more long-standing, let's just say, than the En Marche Party in Paris. But 2 rounds of devastating surprises. One is the referendum. The other is, of course, the snap election. Professor Whiteley, what does that say?
Well, the great strength of democracy is that you can throw people out if you think they're not doing a good job in government. Now, funnily enough, this election in Britain didn't represent a big loss in support for the Conservative Party, because actually their vote share went up. But the real difference was made by the Labour Party, the opposition Labour Party, which is a left populist party. And the thing you're talking about across the world is the rise of populism. It's the rise of populism on the right in the case of the United States, the rise of populism in Britain now, and very interestingly, the rise of centre populism in France. And this is a movement which is discontented about corporate government, the corporate sector, discontented about globalization, very concerned about inequality that's been rising in the Western Hemisphere, and so on. And it's a reaction to that.
But Professor Whiteley, we see the 2 prime ministers earlier, both Prime Minister May and her predecessor, seem to have little knowledge, little tiny knowledge about exactly what's going on. One confidently called for a referendum vote, the other confidently called for a general election, which her party eventually lost up certain votes to the other party, even though it is still a minority. So do politicians these days in your country, particularly those in the leading parties, know exactly what's going on in the country? Are they disconnected? Do people tell them the real information?
I'm not sure politicians throughout the world know exactly what's going on.
Well, that's a big statement, sir. You just made.
But remember, yes, remember that in the case of David Cameron, Theresa May's predecessor, he was concerned about the rise of right-wing populism in Britain in the form of support for the United Kingdom Independent Party. And they were growing in the polls. They'd actually won the European parliamentary elections in 2014, and he was very concerned about losing support to them. And so he offered the referendum vote in order to, in effect, to try to stem the rise in support for them. But of course, as you were saying earlier, it backfired. Now, Mrs. May has faced the problem of Brexit now and the big negotiations that Britain is going to start to have with the European Union.
Right.
And this is a big issue, and the country's divided on it. But she hasn't made a very good start, because now she's challenged by populism from the left, from the Labour Party.
Whether it is left or right, the interesting thing, Professor Whiteley, probably you have already known very well, during the campaign of Prime Minister May and also the Labour Party opponent, actually not real discussions happen much about what so-called the original reason was to have this snap election, which is Brexit. Having said that, though, let me go to you, Professor Hagle. Your country also been facing some challenges as a result of last year's election. To say the least, an outlier, President Trump, comes into the office. Establishments, both parties, do not like him, but that seems to be the case right now. He's still hanging on.
Yeah, the problem with Trump, of course, as you just indicated, was that he's an outsider. And that's basically what the people wanted. Now, you can argue, of course, that a lot of people within the Republican Party, not just the establishment, but a lot of voters really didn't pick Trump as their first choice. But because of the way the system is structured, that's the one that we've got. And he had a lot of support among a lot of people that maybe were disillusioned with the way the system was working. So in that sense, I would say, agree with Professor Whiteley in the idea that people were just getting tired of the current political system. A lot of times for different reasons, and each country has its own specific issues. But here in America, the people were just unhappy with the direction that the current political classes were taking us, and they decided to rebel.
But what about the fact that the rebel happened from time to time with different kinds of groups? And in the United States, we see that as well. I mean, for France, for this case of UK, it is different. But in the US, it's mainly a small group of white, non-college educated male that has been actually deciding where the country is going, Professor Hagle. Certainly you are not included in it.
Well, there's certainly, that was a focus of this last election. We're talking about white working class males. And a lot of these people who are in various jobs of various sorts felt that they were being left behind, either because of industrialization or because of changes in types of industries. You talked about the coal miners in particular, so the energy sector. But you have those types of groups rise and sort of rebel in one way or another. Every number of years, I was just talking before the show about the Reform Party back in the 90s with Ross Perot, that was, again, sort of a rebelling against the political establishment. So it does happen from time to time. It's not often successful, but they can often play the spoiler factor. And to a certain extent, although it wasn't a separate party this time with Donald Trump, it was a certain group of people that rebelled against the system.
And we see the instability probably and the uncertainty still going on. Even with your election, Professor Whiteley, there has been a lot of talk about whether Prime Minister May even assume once again the minority party and also her role as the Prime Minister, be able or not to be able to form a strong government. Even the Queen delayed her speech for now. What does it say? Are much uncertainty still ahead, Professor Whiteley, frankly speaking?
Well, when you have a minority government, which is what this is, it can't command a large majority in the House of Commons, then you have real problems getting business through. Because ultimately in Britain, having the majority of votes in the House of Commons is what counts. That's where the power is. And I don't think Theresa May can survive. I think after this electoral defeat, even though she ended up in government, she is likely to be ousted at some stage, possibly in a few months' time, and a new Conservative leader and Prime Minister will have to take over, I think.
Even though in France, I have to say, Ms. Conway-Mouret, things are a bit different. 94% of votes already counted. Mr. Macron's party comfortably leading with more than 32%, even for this first round. The projections by 3 pollsters of LREM's Italy have already suggested 390 to 445, potentially the biggest majority since President Charles de Gaulle, Conservative, won more than 80% of seats in the year 1968. So, Ms. Conway-Mouret, what does this say? But will this victory sustainable?
Well, yes, because President Macron will have a very, very strong majority. Now, the danger, of course, for our democracy is that there will be very little debate because the opposition is going to be reduced to a very small number. And one has to remember that the role of Parliament is very important. A text that comes out from government is never perfect, and that's why there are hours of discussion within the 2 chambers in any case, and that the right that we have to amend the text is a fundamental one because we represent the people and we're very close to what they want, and in effect it's through these discussions and we have a system where the text goes from the National Assembly to the Senate and then back to the National Assembly. It's done in that way so that the text can be improved. But you know, I think if there is that overall majority, it's also because the French are watching what's happening both in the United States and of course Britain. And in effect, what's happening is that through those elections, we see that the executive in both countries somehow is weakening the country. I mean, somehow, you know, President Trump's behavior and so on, it doesn't actually make the states stronger.
Let's criticize the other country maybe later. Let's just talk about our own issues here. Ms. Conway-Mouret, I mean, one of the things in your election is very clear right now, which is different social and political parties seem to, or different political groups seem to play different role at different times. Remember, there was strong support for Le Pen, there was strong support for Mélenchon, and now in this election, you see extremely strong support for Macron. So you see this unpredictability of who will play a major role in the election, always switching. What does it say about the politics these days, elections particularly? Ms. Conway-Mouret, very briefly from you.
Well, what you're talking about are polls, but they didn't actually translate in the votes because President Macron's election was overwhelming in the second round. Yes, there was the rise of the National Front because people wanted kind of, you know, were very sensitive to a very strong speech, and it's what happened as well in Britain and the rise of the UKIP party. But again, the UKIP was swept away, and that was a good thing, I think, for the UK and for the rest of the world. But for us, we have a people that want to believe that they have a strong leader, and somehow President Macron today is projecting that image where he can shake President Trump's hand and it goes around the world because the media just love it. But it's symbolic of him resisting and being a strong man, and that's what the French want, and maybe that's what a lot of the people in those countries that are voting also want as a leader.
Professor Hagle, remember, probably that's what the U.S. voter also wanted during the election campaign with Mr. Trump, then the candidate, talking about the fight against China, fight against everybody, and during his in his rhetorics. But of course, his policies have been evolving since coming into the White House. So, does personality really play the biggest role these days? Do people really look at what the after-election effect gonna be politically at all?
Well, it's a combination of things, and of course, Trump was voted in largely because, and many of his supporters liked him because of his willingness to fight. But as was indicated, the personality behind it doesn't always work as well in a campaign once you'd have to become the executive. In other words, campaigning is different than governing. And what we're seeing, aside from anything else, is that it doesn't always translate well because now Donald Trump, the president, has to deal with the Congress, has to deal with party regulars in Congress and elsewhere that he didn't have to as a candidate.
But on the other hand, you also see even the French president, Mr. Macron, if I could ask you, Mr. Hagle, once again, that he is new in this position. He is very young politician. His party extremely new. Nobody knows what the party's record has been because it was just established. So why would people all of a sudden believe in something that they have never seen before, that they would never be able to testify whether what they promised are likely to come true? Professor Hagle, is it out of desperation?
Well, I don't know that it's desperation necessarily, certainly frustration in that, again, each country is different, but French voters undoubtedly wanted to see something different, and now President Macron had that opportunity to basically say, hey, let's do something different. We're not going to be right, we're not going to be left, something that's more in the center, and give the people of France more of what they want, try to improve the country. And I think that he has sort of this opportunity now, particularly given what we expect to be the legislative outcome, both yesterday and next week, that it gives him that opportunity. We'll have to see if he's able to actually achieve what he wants, but he certainly has a good opportunity to do so.
And of course, coming September, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is likely to face one of those biggest challenges, another election season. Coming from the European perspectives, Professor Whiteley, what do you make of that possibility? Likely to be influenced by many other European countries? Or Germany, very likely to be different?
Well, I thought a few months ago that Angela Merkel would face a real challenge in her attempt to run for the chancellorship again, because the Social Democrats had a new leader and the polls in Germany shifted upwards and it looked like she had a real fight on her hands. But since then, a number of elections have taken place in Germany, and she's done rather well, her and her party. So I've got a feeling that in September she's very likely to be re-elected, and that will give some stability to Europe. She's probably the most important leader in the European Union, and this will give some stability and continuity at a time when we're facing all these tremendous changes.
And what do you think about that, Ms. Conway-Mouret, briefly?
Well, yes, indeed. I fully agree what was just said. I think we need experience, and Chancellor Merkel certainly has that. She's possibly the most experienced politician now, having been in power for so long. And we need a strong Europe, and we also need, of course, with the rise of young newcomers. We have, I think, in Ireland, in any case, a new prime minister will even be younger than President Macron. So we need this, I suppose, this wave of change with people who are daring, who rise to challenges, and if they win election, we just hope that they'll continue. And then we also need people like Angela Merkel that have the experience and have this right balance.
You say a lot about what we need, but we don't want to forget all of the three of you, even me included, are elites in the country. Professor Hagle, it used to be that the elites did the prediction, but it never worked out. So what's going to happen? Nobody knows. Should we believe in the polls anymore? Nobody knows. Professor Hagle.
Well, that's true. A lot of people have been very unhappy with polls, and very surprising. The Brexit was one example of that. We've seen others. But again, there's a certain frustration among the people, and they want to try something new. Sometimes it'll work out, sometimes not, but at least it shakes up the system, so people will take a closer look at what the problems are, maybe find new ways and innovative ways to fix them.